Je kanawan hij Eoltha, Block, Mither, Mater and Health. What a fine little boy he was. He knew the earth around him, he knew the streams. He had food, family, meat and good health. People gave him a wide berth, but he was a bright boy and he taught himself without their support.
Hello there. For those of you that haven't seen me or my face before, I'm Patrisha Buck. I'm the writer for the Heartsfelled production. So the production, as you may or may not know, is based on a saga-style poem that I wrote originally, and we've created Heartsfelled and the Museum of Stories in order to give a setting to tell the story that the poem sets out to deliver. And in so doing, that means that we had to create the Museum of Stories itself. So I thought it might be fun just to show you around a little bit and show you what some of this represents. And it is all representative, I think, when you're creating a place like this, because let's face it, there's no such thing as a museum of stories, except yes there is, because I'm standing in it. So this area I affectionately call the woodland area, and it represents storytelling from primordial time, from prehistory right the way through to early modern, when sitting under trees or sitting in the woodlands, campfires, in some cases ritual or religious activities would all lead to stories being created and told. We did do quite a lot of research into what people associate with storytelling, and definitely the woodland scene with the barky forest floor and the various woodland attributes was a big part of what people told us they associated with storytelling. So I'm wandering around in the Museum of Stories, wondering what to tell you about the different areas. One of my favourite areas, you can barely see, but it's over there, and it's the shelves which contain the lost stories. And we thought that was rather good fun. So Heartsfelled is a story collector, and the lost stories he's got stacked on his shelf there are all kind of dry and brittle, and the things that represent them are kind of old and faded and jaded. But then next to that we have what I've been calling the window on the world, where we have different things from different parts of the world. There's a boomerang, there's a little Japanese man, there's a Chinese dragon, there's a map, and I can't, to be honest, tell you where the map is off, somewhere. Again, stories being collected from all over the world in all sorts of different eras and different circumstances, because that's what Heartsfelled does. He's a storyteller, and he gathers up his stories and he makes them precious. Hi, so I've come to a different part again of the Museum of Stories. Probably the most fun, bringing the sand and the cobbles and the shells into the museum, just for us to have all these tactile things. Again, everything that's here, almost every grain of sand, represents a story to somebody somewhere. And so we've got the Normandy beach landings, we've got somebody's little tent over there. We've got piracy going on here a little bit, perhaps. And I imagine, when I'm thinking about this space, shipwrecks and all the stories that we're familiar with: Robinson Crusoe, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, Treasure Island, of course. These famous shipwreck stories. Shipwrecks seem to lead to stories. My family live in Cornwall, so I can tell you a million shipwreck stories. And so that's really what this area represents for Heartsfelled. This is where he keeps his collection of beach and sea and shipwreck stories, and is inspired to bring them to life. And now, probably one of Heartsfeld's famous and most favourite spots in the museum is this sort of antiquarian table. If you're not sure about what I mean by antiquarian, in the 16th and 17th century and on into the 18th century as well, it became quite the thing to travel the world and collect unusual things that people hadn't seen, And from this arise, of course, people like Darwin, the great inventors, the great scientists, the people who found things around the world and made science and literature and history happen. So, of course, Heartsfelled is an antiquarian. He's a collector of stories, and as such also a collector of objects. So we've got here his microscope, his candles and his lamps, of course, so that he can see to scribe his notes and his stories. And he's working through the ages. There's material here for writing right the way through from almost the time when writing began, and even a little bit of Chinese calligraphy going on here as well. So Heartsfelled is quite the intellectual as well as being quite a collector. And behind me here is a typical collector's cabinet with lots of little trinkets and bits and pieces for him to study and write about later on. So all of these things again represent stories that have yet to be told, or stories that Heartsfelled is developing or just gathering and keeping safe. Still moving around the museum, and I'd like to say when I first left school, although I was already writing poetry and short stories, as a writer you need a day job, and my day job was looking after twin boys and their little brother. So Charles, Nicholas and Roland often inspire my memories of working with those boys and telling stories with them, often inspire the work I do. So in Heartsfeld's Museum of Stories, following up a lot of research that we did, people kept telling me that they associate stories with bedtime, with when they were children, either being under the covers with a book and a torch, which is what I did, or having a story read to them, such as the Enid Blyton stories, which I had to feature because they came up so frequently. The Faraway Tree and stories of that nature would naturally be stories that Heartsfelled would gather and keep and really find very precious indeed. So the child is of course the real hub of any storyteller's world. And this kiddie has got he's got his 5 stones in the bed, so he's a bit of I don't know what he does when he's supposed to be going to bed. He obviously leaves his light on and plays. He's got a snail shell here and a book that he's been reading, as well as all of his toys and things, and some books ready to take to school there. So the child's corner, the child's bedroom, is as important to Heartsfelled as a story collector and a storyteller as any other part of the museum might be. So as we started to see from the area which is known as the window on the world, some stories are quite exotic. They don't all come from just England or just our culture. They come from cultures all over the world, and that has to be acknowledged. And then you get cross-cultural stories as well. So what we have in this quarter of the museum is, I guess, the exotic Far East. So we've got stories like Sinbad the Sailor, 1001 Nights, all sorts of very rich, very meaningful, and often to the people, to the cultures that they come from, very important stories to be told. So naturally Heartsfelled is going to have a good strong collection of these, although I see his bookcase has got all sorts mixed, and that's a good thing. That's typical of Heartsfelled. He's got his overlying theme and then all sorts of other things mixed in, because he's just got so many stories to take care of. Thank you for following us through the long forgotten door. And our thanks to Heartsfelled for letting us in to share this very special space. One final thing to tell you about the Museum of Stories. Like Heartsfelled, it's ageless and it's timeless. It doesn't stay in one place for very long. So everything that we've seen here today will gradually just dissolve away, as will Heartsfelled himself. But it'll be back, and it'll be back somewhere else with more stories and more things that Heartsfelled will have collected to share with us. So thank you so much for being with us on this particular journey, and we'll all look forward to seeing you again another time.